the panel on game designers fixing the U.S. Constitution. Real quick, I'm Luke Peterson, I'm a game designer. I write the Extra Politics series. I made Bakugan, that was my game. Did a bunch of other random stuff. Been doing tabletop game design for 20-something years. And we're going to keep this quick. So you are?
Chris Hazard. I worked in serious games for about a decade. I also did a couple entertainment titles as well, like Akron. Now I'm in AI. My PhD is in the AI of trust and reputation.
And my name is Carl Rauscher. I'm a fiction writer and part-time futurist. I also develop games in my spare time, and I have been known to work for the military and other organizations.
Yes, very good. All right, so that's us. And clearly we're important because we're up here. All right, so quick background slide real quick. Founding Fathers, that's the closest I can get to a convention crowd at the bottom. We have the same job. They have the job of starting the government, and we have the job of continuing to make it better. I would like to think that in 240 years, we've learned how to do things better. That's what this panel's about. It's about taking Constitution to Constitution 2.0, which is, the reason it's 2 already is Articles of Confederation is probably our governing document 1.0, so this is probably 2.27.
Well, it's more of a 0.5, that was a beta.
Yeah, that was a beta. That's right, that was a beta. It's actually good analysis. So, why are we doing this? It's our job. I don't mean our job, I mean it's our job. When systems stagnate, the absolute worst theories and strategies become dominant, as our game theorists can tell you all about, with some German philosopher problem that you'll probably reference someday.
I will at some point, yes.
At some point, yes. When rules stagnate, bad things happen. There's an interesting game called basketball. Maybe you've heard of it. We know every rule change that ever happened in basketball. The original basketball rules are in a museum in a frame. And all of those rules were changed because the environment changed and time progressed. Those rules have changed more than our government, and I would say that our government is slightly more important than basketball. All right. We all know what an amendment is, or you wouldn't be sitting here. An amendment is an update to a foundational document that everything flows from for our country. And an amendment should have certain features. It should be short, and it should be directional. That just means if your amendment is 4 pages long, you're probably not doing an amendment, you're probably doing a regulation. That's very different. It should also be a structural solution to a problem. That means we have a problem that women can't vote, let's fix that. That's a structure problem. Or the second one is a bringer of clarity. That means, let's say right now the game players have started to play a little bit weird and no one knows what's right or wrong, what's allowable, what's not allowable. That's another really good place for an amendment to come into play. This is how we're going to talk about our amendments. We're going to, first off, this panel is meant to start you thinking and about this process. I think it's important and we don't do enough of it. The people on this stage do not agree with everything that we're going to put up on this slide.
Or possibly anything. There are discussion points.
Yes. Last year I gave a panel on politics and someone called me an anti-American violent revolutionary. Because I was questioning structure. We all talk policy all day long. We rarely talk structure. And that's what this is about. We're game designers and that's what game designers do. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a problem in our country. A situation that 95% of the people in this room will agree with. The problem, and their situation. I think that we'll get about 95% agreeing on the problem.
And some of you may have to leave in order for us to make that number.
Yes.
And many of these were also submitted by people from across the country.
Yes, I put out a general call to the tabletop game design community, and these are many of the ones that came from that. Then we're going to fix it with an amendment. And so I thought I'd start with the easiest one that I could think of. And here's the situation. This is my example for you. Gun culture is vastly different across the country. Everyone agree with that? Yes, absolutely. All right. We no longer fight wars with militias. We fight wars with a large federal government army. We all agree with that? Sure, we agree with that. By the way, the Founding Fathers were scared to death of that concept. Right? They didn't want a large army because they were worried the federal army would entrench on states' rights. Turns out the world's moved on and every country has a large army. We also currently have a system that allows for local control of local issues. This already exists, right? So I've described position, it exists, and the obvious Amendment 28 to our Constitution is repeal the Second Amendment. It is outdated, it makes no sense anymore, and states can do what they want to do. I don't believe I'll ever have 95% agreement on this part. I think on the situation people will agree, but not the. So, with that as our easy throwaway, and you're all looking like we're crazy, that amendment is designed to fix a clarity issue. We don't know where the right to regulate goes. It's an old issue. We have a large federal army. The Second Amendment, by any historical standard, has failed in its objective, which was to stop the formation of a large federal army. Lots of fun history about that. So now we're going to move on, and I will start handing things over to my panelists here for their opinions. We will start with this new situation. Who pays a senator? The federal government, right? Federal government writes that check.
I was going to say the lobbyists, but
It's the taxpayers.
That should be a whole other. Yep. Yeah. So weirdly, though, the federal government does not set the rules for how you become a senator or congressperson. We've changed them. By rules, I mean the regulations. The one amendment, what was the amendment that was a direct election of senators?
I don't remember the. 16?
Anybody? Constitutional scholars out there? Anybody?
17.
17. Excellent. Thanks. There's an extra seat up here. I like people who know things.
I was like, don't make me internet it.
It's like, it wasn't 16. Yeah, it's around there.
Yeah, so we have a situation where the person who hires you doesn't actually decide how you get hired, but they pay your check. Federal officials, the senator from Nebraska has a huge effect on everybody in this room, whether we like that fact or not. I think we all agree on that. I think we agree that there is some tension between the federal government and the state election board, state election rules on how people are elected. If you've noticed, the Supreme Court has been avoiding hearing certain cases, not gerrymandering, because the Constitution is super clear. States can do it. That's just what the Constitution says. It's about as clear as it can be. The Voting Rights Act, most people will tell you, is functionally unconstitutional, because the Constitution says very clearly that states decide how people get to be a congressperson. So we have this tension. This is a lack of clarity. So, going back slide. Election of federal officials, office holders are regulated at the federal level is an amendment that I think is interesting to talk about. What does that mean? What would that mean?
That means that the regulations would come from, it would all be uniform across all the different states. So you wouldn't have some states that are earlier, some that are later. You wouldn't have some imperfections or odd values in what's known as a Shapley value. So even though all powers are equal with given some weights, well, if one influences another or one comes first or there's some sort of cadence to it, you can actually have very imbalanced power structures. And so this would level the playing field, at least from that perspective, from that level. Now, it doesn't say that there's not nonlinear dynamics of people promising things, et cetera, but we'll level one layer of that.
Yeah, that ordering is primaries, right? Like the primaries right now, we know that an Iowa voter is more important than a Virginia voter.
I would argue that we're actually already doing this.
Get closer.
Isn't the Federal Election Commission responsible for setting the process and establishment for how elections are held at the federal level?
Yes, probably also unconstitutional. Yeah, so this is an area where I believe that our government is, just because we've grown, this isn't anybody's fault, it's no one trying to be corruptive, right? But why is it there's 3 weeks of early voting in some states, there's only mail-in voting in other states, and then some states one day you gotta be there.
Or even the Electoral College, where some states it's winner takes all, some is proportional. What about faithless electors? There's a lot of things around there. This could then regulations could define all of that.
Yeah. Anyone have an opinion about that? Nope, you're all for it? All right, thumbs up, good. All right, so I got your vote next year, that's important. All right, another one. Wealthy Americans experience a different justice system. I think we all know this. Any good examples anyone wants to point to? There was a...
OJ.
I would go there. I would say that there was a lady who, as a felon, didn't know she couldn't vote, and she got sentenced to 5 years in prison. And then we have people that use millions of dollars to influence millions of lives and never spend a day in jail. So clearly we have a problem with our justice system being different if you're wealthy. And this has a knock-on effect. If you're wealthy, are you more likely or less likely to bend the rules?
Or another example of a law firm that I heard about where they worked in a medium-sized town, and every day the lawyers would park in the no parking zones next to the city hall and all the main street, and then the secretary would walk out and pay all the fines to the police department or the city hall, and that was just their parking fee, and they could afford it. It was no big deal for them.
Yeah, which is not why that place was no parking. right? We were trying to do some little bit of societal management, and it didn't happen. All right, so this amendment's a little long. And this amendment I would summarize as there is no more private defense attorneys at the federal level. There are countries that have done things similar to this. It means everybody gets the same defense. And what countries do prorated fines?
Germany, I believe.
Sweden?
Sweden, was it?
Yeah, was there $1 million speeding ticket in Sweden? Yeah, because you're so rich. And it's a percentage of your wealth or income, and that's how you judge your fines. Right now, there's a good light being shined on bail and other things that rich people can always pay their bail and poor people can't, and how it becomes a problem. We should never have wealth define how our justice system treats you. Yes?
But the main issue is like 99% of all criminal cases are
Not federal, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Well, and then there's also the concern about what is wealth. When you've got families that can hide them under foundations and institutions and that it no longer apply to an individual, it gets deferred to a corporation, which there really has no entity that other than itself that it holds to.
And is it wealth or income? And I think this will come up with another one where, let's say you've got a family that has a company that has 30 people, and all of their family's capital is tied up in there. So if they get a large fine, that company goes out of business, these 30 people lose their job. Is that better or worse, or should it be based on their income? That's a hard question.
Yeah, but that's what regulations are for. These are guideposts, right? These are not meant to cover all the spaces, but it's a good follow-on conversation. How would you write those regulations? All right, this one's kind of close to my heart because this happens near me, and there's a big medical hospital, a VA hospital where I live. Small military bases, I don't know if you know this or not, they've been closed pretty routinely over the last 15 or so years in an effort to save money. One of the side effects is very few of us live near a military base anymore. Now, I mean, you live near DC, you probably see the military all the time. But you go to other areas of the country and you don't. And I believe this has the mental effect of making it easier for people to be okay with sending troops away to be put in harm's way. If you don't see the flags on the door or the parades with your local military encampment, it seems less personal. And we also know that poor people disproportionately serve in the military versus wealthy people. Yet they are putting their entire lives at risk, which the life of a rich person is worth more than the life of a poor person. Yes?
that last one's kind of skewed because there's more rich people than there's poor people, right?
No.
Actually, speaking as somebody,
The question was, is it not just because there's more poor people than rich people?
speaking as a person who grew up under the standard medium income in the Midwest, the military is the only reason I was able to get out of that small town, quite honestly. There was very little prospect of me going to college due to my wealth, but I could have my college paid for if I joined the military, thereby incentivizing me to put my life at risk in order for the chance for a higher career in the future.
Yeah, the military targets people who want that advancement in life, and it delivers, right? It does a good job with it. So, Amendment 6 to this, every citizen in the United States must perform 2 years of civil service or military duties at a flat pay. Now, this service does not need to be military. This service can be art installations.
Road construction, maintaining parks.
Maintaining parks. There are some downsides to this one that are worth talking about. A lot of people will point at Israel and say that one of the challenges with Israel is their mandatory military service. Most people, when you get out of the military, you're different than when you go in. And the leaders of Israel all have the same background. So you don't get this diversity of leadership styles and opinions, which is why I would include in there things like fixing up our national parks.
Finland, I believe, has something similar.
Actually, I would just modify this slightly, saying every voting citizen of the United States.
All right, Robert
performed
Heinlein. That's right.
Well, part of the problem is mandatory performance.
Yes.
People are going to say, for whatever reason, they don't want to be able to do it. Well, why can't you just say that they can't hold federal office?
Yeah, I think the Starship Troopers is the problem on that one. Rich people just don't care. They'll buy your votes, as we'll see later on. Yes?
Hey, to your point about saying that every voting citizen, don't you feel like that would disincentivize people from going out and registering to vote? Because in game design, from my understanding, people always take the path of least resistance. So if there's going to be a point where you get to engage in a political process, but you lose 2 years of your life for a fixed salary job that you may or may not be particularly jazzed for,
Yeah.
I think that sort of disincentivizes people from joining that system. So I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah, the voting thing's tricky. The government, what does the government do for us at a high level, right? It provides a floor level of services for all of us.
What have the Romans ever done for us?
That's right.
The aqueducts.
Well, of course, the aqueducts.
Yeah, yeah.
And the roads.
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure what they're saying, but this could also be not as bad as you think it is. Because think about when you start voting, what was it?
18.
Yeah, 18. If you're around college or something like that, this could sort of also count as maybe a part-time job or something to help you get a little bit of income as well while you're in college. It's not everyone works while they're in college. For me, I just started working this year. It's my 3rd year. I finally got a job. I'm happy about it. But I've been trying to get a job for my first 2 years and couldn't get one. This could help with that as well, and also teach some people something as well before they get out of college.
Yeah, so the comment was maybe this service would be a life enhancer as opposed to a something you didn't like. And I think that's true of any job, if you get a good job.
You'll have an automatic embedding experience with a number of other folks, and you already have a little social network out of that. Even if you had a rough high school, you'll have made new friends, been forced through something positive with a bunch of other people.
Well,
I would like to counter that point, because why force me to do it when you could just voluntarily join the military if you want to?
No, but
there are other jobs.
Remember
Yeah.
what they said. It doesn't have to be military.
Yeah.
It could be, there are other jobs. Was it?
But how do you?
We don't need a military that big.
You have a choice in what you
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be military. That's the thing.
There'd have to
You
be
don't
a screening.
I was going to say, when John F. Kennedy initially proposed the development of the Peace Corps, it was with that idea of them doing civic and public service, getting that sense of volunteering to help the community itself with basic improvements. So it wasn't just a matter of bulking up the war machine. It was a matter of increasing local control and local participation by people, thereby instilling that idea of, as you're going to be making decisions in the future, you're going to be making it with the mindset of the people that you've been helping for the past couple of years, not making it for random people that you have never met.
Anyone here go to Mary Washington College or Virginia Tech or for University of Virginia? Yeah, so a lot of those schools still have buildings on them. I went to Mary Washington that were built during the Depression by the WPA, the Works Progress. So one of the real benefits of this, I see long term, is actually, we have a member of this later, we get to build infrastructure with this type of thing that could pay dividends for 100 years. Yeah, back there in the blue hat. Thanks for standing up. Yes, stand up. That's great.
Hi.
Oh, there's two blue hats.
I'm still standing.
Yes, go. All right.
So if we equate civil service to mean volunteerism, does mandatory volunteerism mean value the concept of volunteerism?
Yeah, it's
Great
not
question. Yeah.
It's voluntelling, I think.
But if you're voluntold, it doesn't have any moral worth.
No.
Well, and that's why I believe that you should have an opt-out capability, but there needs to be a reward mechanism for those people who are volunteering besides general altruism.
This could be considered grind, right, for leveling up?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wouldn't categorize this as, unlike the other panelists here, I wouldn't categorize this as volunteering at all. I would say it's something you do, and maybe if we have a good system for positioning you into a job that gives you a future, it could make your life better long term. All right, Grace, yes.
So somebody asked us to, like, how would you decide what we go into? If you're basically kind of volunteering to either go into civil service or military, what if everyone wanted to go into civil service and no one wanted to go into military? Like,
That sounds like a regulation question,
Yeah.
not an amendment question.
because I feel like if you had a choice, wouldn't you choose civil service than potentially risking your life to go into the military? So then, how would you decide who would go where to make it fair to everyone?
It's already fucked up men have to do selective service.
We'd have some very creative regulation writing that hopefully would work. But I think that's a great question though, because when you make an amendment, and this is why amendments are hard to get done right here, right? Because you have an idea and the idea is sound, and someone smartly takes the idea 3 steps down and starts fighting that 3 steps down. And we forget the slide before this that everyone agrees with, that it is the problem. And we don't trust each other to write regulations that are trustworthy and good. All right, I'm going to go way to the back so people can hear me. Way in the back. All right, big and loud. Do your thing.
This might be more of a regulation question or a law question.
Sure.
Are you afraid of net neutrality? How like video gaming and like people who use video gaming in their life to keep the status quo? So like marijuana is a big question.
Sure, sure.
Afraid that video games might come up with some net neutrality to
So that's pretty regulatory questions. I would say probably not the right panel, but they're all good questions. We do have an amendment in here that I think is going to come close to talking about that. I'm sorry, there's a pointer and then someone pointing at what Brett had.
Oh.
So,
if the problem is that the wealthy don't go into the military, are you just creating the same problem because the wealthy are going to have the resources to pick the service they want, as opposed to the poor who are not going to be able to just come up with some sort of service and are essentially going to get shunted into the military anyway, making the whole exercise self-defeating?
I'm guessing this is a draft-like situation, without deferments.
Then this reminds me of the discussion that we had before about if you get a bunch of people to make the mechanisms for a society, the best way to do that is they all come up with all of them, and afterward that group of people are randomly chosen for a socioeconomic class. After they've decided.
Right,
you will get fair
more, and
results.
I'm going to move on to the next one. Yeah.
My question about this particular amendment is, wouldn't pushing people into civil or military service create a situation where thought is sort of, there's less types of thought, which leads to stagnation in science and invention and so on?
Yeah, so you're worried about like the 20-year-old genius who has to spend 2 years cleaning up a national park because...
What I mean by that...
that's a legitimate fear, by the way, yeah, sorry.
My worry is that in order to solve certain problems, you have to have certain types of thought and a variety of thoughts within people. But once you start crystallizing that to a certain way of doing things, which would be caused by military or civil service because of the way things are done...
Oh, I'd love to tackle this one.
Go.
Speaking as a person who retired from the military, I was in 4 different branches, if you count the National Guard as a particular branch. And I know absolutely what you're talking about when you talk about groupthink, but that's a product of the people, that's not a product of the institution. I worked with some people, especially in the engineering fields, that were very much on the ball when it came to understanding how systems work, how creativity gets involved, the importance of using diversity of thought, those kind of things which are actually go counter to groupthink. So it's a matter of making sure that we're emphasizing that part, and not just, when they talk about military, we're not talking about let's put a gun in your hand and put you in a sandbox, point in a general direction and say shoot anything that way.
Yeah, there are more people in Army bands than Foreign Service operators. Right, there are a lot of jobs in the military and in service that we can have people work on.
Yes, but it starts with the same basic training.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes, it does.
Right, my buddy with the tuba has to wear armor when he goes in a helicopter to fly to the officers club when he's stationed overseas.
Yep, and I had to learn how to fire an M16, although my job was to operate the electrical generator.
Yes. All right, I'm going to move on because I think we can talk about each of these forever, and I love these conversations. So if you have a question on the next one, you're up next. All right. Okay, this one is really passionate, another passion play of mine, which is not my amendment. Our system of government is really, really bad at long-term planning. Really bad. And this has had an obviously detritus effect. We were the last nation to do a lot of things that we now assume that we were, sort of in the front of. Slavery, voting rights, right? We were really, really late to those parties to getting rid of those things. So,
yeah, let me just go.
So voting rights expire at 65. Yeah, I like this. This is good hubbub right here. It's just like in the city tavern when everybody was drinking and saying we're going to fight the British. Let me explain.
How did you do 65?
It's the first age you get Social Security. If you do it early, you get 65.
We can't hear you now.
Oh. If you get to Social Security at the earliest age possible at 65. Someone asked why I picked 65. Oh, you can go 63?
Yeah.
Oh.
Maybe 59.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was 67 or 65. I am 49.
Okay, well, so you can't vote.
That's right. So, let me tell you why this exists. I just recently heard a story of someone who died shortly after voting. Let's just use that as our standard. Is that person thinking long term who makes that vote? Right? Who should be thinking the most long term about our nation? People who plan to live here the longest. And obviously you don't want to go too young because you don't have the mental capacity to make good decisions, when you're 4. And it put the onus on older people to have conversations with younger people to try to sway their opinions and get them to vote. And I'd much rather have grandma asking me to vote her way than having grandma just vote her way, because all she cares about is her social. My grandmas are all dead, but if she were alive, she'd be saying, "Get me on this box." But if she were alive and outside of the grave, she'd be saying, she would just vote for her own interest. That's the kind of person she would. All right, over here. Yes.
My question, and it's in regards to the other question, is actually it ties in because some of these things are sort of like, in order to be a citizen, in order to participate in our democracy, you need to meet this criteria. You need to work for 2 years, or you have to be at a specific age. My question is that how does this deal in terms of people who are able-bodied versus not able-bodied, especially people with disabilities, and especially people with lower life expectancy, because they're going to have a different decision-making process, and there are certainly people at 65 and older, the gap from people at 65 who are then going to die in the next few years versus people who are going to live till 90 is drastically different, and we have different reasons why. So there's actually a study that says that people get more conservative as they get older. It's not because people get more conservative, it's because the people who are liberal die. They don't have access to proper health care. And so if you are putting this range there, then you're still going to skew things because it's dependent on a bunch of other factors.
Let me add another let me pile onto that another problem with this one, that this might increase the divide between the old and the young, because all the old people are going to go, hey, I'd like to talk to you because I want to convince you of something, and now the young people don't want to talk to the old people at all.
Could happen.
Actually, I was just going to go with the different thing. The problem really isn't the voters voting for their own self-interest. The problem is the legislatures who are voting for their interests, or the interests of the people that are paying them. And like I said, so I think a lot of the longer-term thinking, it becomes longer-term when people are thinking other than what's my next paycheck or what's my next election cycle.
Yeah, I think to your point, specifically about people with longer life expectancies or shorter life expectancies or disabilities, I think when you're at the amendment level, it's very tough to make distinctions like that. Yes.
We make distinctions all the time when we're talking about making sure that people are equally represented when it comes to gender and ethnicity.
Yes, but rarely at the amendment level. Rarely.
Voting, we had to make amendments for that.
So the voting rights, this is one of those weird things. It's just we haven't amended the Constitution meaningfully in 45 years. The last one we did was senators can't vote for their own pay raises. So we do a lot legislatively. I agree with you. I would love to see more of that at this level, right? I'd love to see a non-discrimination amendment that was strong and all-encompassing. Would be awesome.
Like the ERA?
Like the Equal Rights Amendment?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. But that's if you want to figure out why amendments are so hard to pass, follow that one. But we have strategies later. Yes, back
Virginia's
there.
voting this year.
So in a country where, and quickly researched number, but maybe 30% of our voting age population is over 65, why are we trying to skew voting toward people with a long-term view by preventing those older people from being able to speak their point, rather than doing something to encourage people in that age bracket to vote?
Sure, because it's basically the first part of your comment, right? I'm defending things here that I might not agree with. That's my job. So, I'm not an anti-American fascist, whatever. But if you think about how do you get us to think longer term at a core, fundamental, structural way, right? The best way in my mind, or in this amendment's mind, is to think about encouraging younger people to have a larger impact. And if we can't force them to vote, we can.
Why not?
Well, I'm going to say it.
We can. That is a thing that has been done in other countries.
I don't think forcing young people to vote in this country is not going to help people, and it's not going to really help the true, real root cause of people feeling lost, feeling like, they feel like, the two parties that we have in this country, and the system, they fail. They feel like, you know what, I'm done supporting these, and, people who actually do support their parties, they're on the fringe, because there are some people, looking at previous presidential election, you know how low it was.
Yeah, we definitely have low turnout.
They have low turnout, not just because the voting laws like disenfranchise minority, black people, and everything, that's helped. But once you sit there and say, I vote, I do everything right, and yet the politicians I put in the local and the national and everything else, not only give me at least a bit of breadcrumbs, and then screw me everything else. I'm like, you know what? Why not just sit back and say let me go first?
Yeah,
I'm already screwed over. So why should I actually go with next help? And now you're going to tax me a little more?
We have a country that has this freedom, is the word you often hear with America. It's on a lot of t-shirts with flags and stripes and stars. I think it'd be very tough for our country, oddly, to force folks to vote, where other countries have had an easier time doing that. I think culturally that's a tough call. I got you. Right there.
Well, first I agree with the statement that we should not prevent people from voting in order to encourage other people to vote. Because I've always said the same with voter suppression tactics. And if your goal is to get more of your people to vote by preventing others from voting, then you do not have a message. You're just actively suppressing voting. The other thing I'll say is, I'm also against mandatory voting because I don't think that is American. The other thing finally I would say is that I disagree that having the process move slowly is a problem with our system. I think it is actually a benefit to it, and that conservatism is not stopping change, it is slowing down change and making sure we are making the right changes.
Yeah, I think the point about slow being good is definitely in our design, for sure. I would also say, though, this is nothing up here is meant for political advantage or disadvantage, and you have to understand that it will have that effect, which is why people will fight. Every one of the things I've mentioned here would have some effect on who wins an election. That's not the point. That's not the reason. That's why I'm just trying to define the problem first. So if anyone has a better solution.
Like I said, I
really with the guy who gave this amendment because it's not mine.
I think part of the problem, the best example I can think of is we just recently had the hearings with Facebook executives that they broadcast, and you had the senators or whatever who are asking questions, showing that they obviously didn't understand the technology that they were going to write the laws for.
Yeah.
And I think that really the problem we have with long-term thinking is we're asking people to make laws and make decisions on behalf for large swatches of our population about things that really require a lot of thought and a lot of dialogue. Yet we don't require that thought and dialogue before we have that decision made.
Yeah, and the world is changing so fast right now. And generally at a certain age, you stop becoming involved in the cutting edge of the technology and understanding how things are going to go. You actually segued, so I'm going to run to the next one real quick. All right, situation. Laws are way easier to pass than they are to get rid of. I just mentioned the world is changing faster than our ability to change bad laws. And when outdated laws get abused, we all suffer. This comes to some of the voting issues that you brought up. What's that?
Is this a TTL?
Kind of, you'll see.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so the idea is that if a law is bad and old and it serves one advantage to one party, it will just be abused for that party's advantage, even if that law is not relevant or even a good idea anymore. So I'll continue.
All right, so actually I think we talked about some different things about this one, but so all laws must be reauthorized on a schedule regulated but not to exceed 15 years. This can be rated by how much it is passed by. So let's say a law gets passed by 80% of the votes, that might as well be permanent. Everyone agrees that. But if it was only passed by 50%, well, maybe that's only good for 2 years, and then it needs to be revoted again in 2 years again. And have a sliding scale there. And we can also decouple that. I think was that one a different one, or was that one out? Where they can't all be bundled. So you can't just say, you can't just say, oh, we're going to prove everything was from 2 years ago. No, they all have to be read, or there's some throttling of the number of them that can be evaluated. So that you really filter. There's a sunset, an automatically sunsetting provision for the laws. And similarly, so that you don't have to make more laws on inflation, like, oh, this is $500 or not to exceed whatever, and then a whole bunch of things happen in the economy that's outdated, by default tie everything to inflation unless there's a good reason to not do that.
Yeah, so where would this help? This would help situations like, we just passed a bill to create an organization to do electric car somethings, right? That law could stay in effect forever. And you could find that 20 years down the road, we moved on to fusion cars. There's still an electric car agency because somebody is getting paid and it's good for somebody.
There's still an organization that was maintaining hemp, I think up until like about 10 years ago, to make sure there's enough hemp to make ropes for World War I.
Yeah.
My concern about having sunset, though, is, for example, like Violence Against Women Act, which sunsetted, but then it became a political football in the political discourse, so that we're not going to vote for that because you won't vote for my thing, kind of thing. And I can see a lot of really good laws that need to be maintained in that there are all of a sudden going to become additional cannon fodder to increase the divisiveness. So I'm a little concerned about having...
Legit downside, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, terrible. Yes.
Well, one of the main structural issues of like this kind of amendment in the first place is most of the time, most of the people voting on laws don't actually have to read them. And so then you're also going to be like tripling the amount of laws that people are going to have to not read and repass again. And basically, senators and
members of Congress.
Members of Congress pretty much don't work most of the year. So like either they'd have to be in more to like actually read all these bills, or hire more staff and more people to catch them up on all these bills after they are. Everything's right.
There was an amendment in here, at least an earlier draft submitted, that fixed that, and we got cut out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit the biggest fault of this, is that sometimes you don't want to bring stuff up, but you have to ask yourself, is politics always bringing stuff up and re-looking at it or not? Because that law did sunset and it did become a problem, right? Sunsets in anyway. All right, up against the wall.
I feel like with this situation and the concerns that were addressed in the earlier one, wouldn't federal term limits be a better solution instead of having the laws having a sunset? It should be that the lawmakers have a sunset.
Actually, there's a neat technique done by some of the strategy management consulting firms in the U.S. That the first time that you're voted in as CEO or the managing partner, you need a 50% vote. They do some sort of instant runoff voting. But then the next time you rerun again, you have to get 60% of the vote or 55%. It keeps on ratcheting up. So you're never a lame duck, but it always gets harder and harder. And that's one solution that's similarly sliding scale.
Yeah, I would love to do a whole panel on weird, interesting ways to keep fresh ideas. Those are all going to be regulations. So if we federalized elections, somewhere in there we could put all sorts of interesting voting methods. I love the idea that to run again you have to get more votes than last time, because that means over time you will have to reach across the aisle in your own district for more support. It means you're actually doing the job. I'm going to go one more, so we're getting a little low on time. All right, we have no constitutional rights to deal with monopolies at all. We have the, what is the right?
Antitrust.
Sherman antitrust?
Yeah.
Antitrust. Yeah. And we have new and dangerous monopolies in the tech sector that we don't know how to deal with. We're seeing this in real time unfolding right now.
And there's local monopolies, there's national monopolies, there's a whole bunch of things that happen that government sometimes needs to take care of and sometimes not.
Yeah, you know, when the country was founded, they called the president. They picked that word because it was the least powerful word they could come up with, because the president was the person who ran a company. That's what companies were thought of when this country was formed. They were temporary, generally speaking, short-term deals. Presidents were like meaningless, so they picked that title for our president because they wanted to be clear how unimportant this guy was going to be. And of course, at that point, it was a guy.
Some people did not get that memo.
Didn't quite work out right. We all make mistakes. Founding fathers were perfect. All right, all you take.
All right. So in a critical industry, which is defined somehow via regulation, has a single company that makes more than 30% of the revenue in that industry, or a company earns more than 1.1% of the revenue of all U.S. companies, then that company must be split into 2 or more entities with no overlap of ownership within 1 year, which means that the shareholders need to find a way to separate it. Otherwise, there'll be some worse penalties via regulation.
Yeah.
So this basically follows the Ma Bell model.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, when the telephones were considered a monopoly, it got split up. I don't think anybody in here would say that Google's not really, really quickly approaching monopoly status if it isn't already. You can search with other engines, and the only reason Google hasn't crushed those engines is because they don't want everyone to say they're a monopoly. Yes, right.
What would happen to the intellectual property owned by those companies? Would it be split between the two companies? Would they both have it?
I'd go public domain it. If it was, yeah, that's what I would do. I'd either say they both have to share it for a zero royalty back and forth, or I'd say that it's public domain. Public domain is a normal thing we do with artistic ideas all the time. It is not unreasonable to public domain business knowledge. Normally it sunsets that way, but it's not considered unnormal.
This goes down to regulations of how you do that. But maybe there's an initial divide, and then shareholders basically have to trade until or vote on it until they've come to an agreement.
Yeah. Outside.
Is there a particular reason why you're constantly using numbers in these amendments? Because amendments are so hard to pass, but also so hard to repeal, if a couple of years down the line it turns out that the number is off, it would be incredibly difficult to adjust it. So why, it seems like every time you guys introduce an amendment, there's a number, and that makes it seem more like a regulation.
That's fair. Yeah,
that's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of these would be tough to write without a number. Like the voting age is tough to write without a number. This one probably isn't. I think numbers in our cases, I'm hoping, are there because we don't trust the regulators to get key parts right. So 2 years of service, right, for that last one. I could just imagine the endless arguing about what's the right number of years. Instead of regulating, which is how do we decide who serves where and how does all that work. But that's a very, very fair point. Yes?
Does this amendment come into conflict with corporate personhood? And can you also maybe fix that?
Yeah, I would love to do some short ones, like companies aren't people and have no rights, other than corporate rights. And honestly, that probably should have made the list.
Yeah, a goofy counter argument is if you keep this and a person has more than that amount, well then
cut the person in half and decide who owns each half. All right, so let me go back there.
How do you define the critical industry?
We do that all.
By regulation.
What's that?
I was going to say by regulation.
Yeah, we already do that a bunch of times. We'll call something critical. Steel used to be critical. Oil, we have a strategic oil reserve because we consider oil strategic reserve. Usually they're related to if we go to war, what do we need? But that's kind of an outdated way to think, I think. But great question. All right, let me go to this next one real quick. All right, I mentioned that the president was designed to be the weaker branch of government. They were worried about kings at the time. That is not how it ended up playing out. Our president is probably the most powerful structural democratic leader in the world, and I just mean like from structure. Take any other first world democracy, import their structure, their prime minister, or who'd be one of us, would never have anywhere near the power our current president does. The FBI, which didn't exist until 40s, 30s? 30s, yeah. When we decided to give it to the executive branch, the FBI, we gave it to the executive branch because we didn't have a home for it and we didn't want to give it to Congress. Turns out it's also the only agency that can effectively investigate the president, their boss. That's a pretty bad structure too. And most of the solutions we have to checking the president's power are incredibly slow. The time between a president reaching too far or just doing too much and that president getting reined back is very, very long and often very political. Yes?
Quick question.
Yeah.
With regard to the control of the presidency, you tackled corruption, which is generally speaking the more worrying thing when you mix power and money and control. What about health? The president becomes incapacitated or is really not in office.
We already have an amendment for that.
Yes. My question will be, I'm pretty sure there's no control in place for the president slides off the deep end. It's to order nuclear. And that's really like, yes, people should be resigned, but
Yeah,
And that's why the vice president with the majority of the cabinet can make that decision, because that's something that they can respond to in a very short instant before he can take action, like setting off a nuclear war.
Yeah, oddly, the nuclear war isn't the one that would scare me. It's the really, really, really bad other thing that the president's own party would want to buck the president on. Because there's a huge difference between being popular and thoughtful, I guess is the thing. So this is just step one in this one, but I think there's absolutely no excuse for our president to have the ability to pardon anybody. That ability to pardon comes from King George. That's where we got the idea from, because the king had it, so we thought, well, our guy should have it too. It was considered so overpowered in King George's day that he never used it. George Washington used it twice, I think. And he tended to use it, I think, for people who did things during the Revolution.
I believe so.
Yeah, I believe so too. But this is an insane power to give the most powerful person in our country. Yes?
I would counter that with the power of pardon is the executive's check on the judiciary. And that if if there is an improper conviction, I'm thinking of particularly the judiciary goes after supporters of the president. I'm not saying that has ever happened.
Sure.
But that is an important power.
Would you rather have that power in the hands of Congress? Because I'd be happy to move the pardon power to Congress. Oh, maybe not. No, it's a little tricky. The problem with the executive branch, though, is it's one person with no check. Literally, we don't even know if the president can pardon himself. We don't know if that's allowed.
You can't.
Really? Has anyone tried?
And that would be a good amendment. Yeah.
Usually don't let
But I wouldn't repeal.
So there's guidance from the DOJ. You can't pardon himself. All right. Can you cut a deal to have your vice president pardon you? Yeah.
So the counter to that is though the legislative check on the judiciary is the impeachment of justices.
Yes, they can impeach justices. Yeah.
I believe that this is still an important check on the judiciary.
So give me a quick example of a situation, just so I'm not quite understanding, where like the president has a friend, the judiciary.
I mean, look at this. I mean, I would say there have been good pardons that have happened, many good pardons that have happened because of improper sentencing laws and immunity.
Oh yeah, I actually agree. In fact, I think some of the recent drug reclaiming has been great. I think it would have all those would have been better by passing laws, not by a single person deciding what to do. Because I mean, the Clinton rich pardon was as corrupt as they come in my book. Like it was my friend who helped raise money to get me elected is going to go to jail,
Right.
and I'm going to stop it.
But there have also been, I would think that the amount of improper and worrisome pardons is minuscule in comparison to the amount of worrisome convictions that have happened.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. All right, we'll keep going on somebody. Ian.
I think I have a good compromise. Someone said that this would remove the executive's check on the judicial branch. I think what you could do easily is rather than give the presidential position the pardon, you could give it to the president plus the cabinet with a simple, I guess a supermajority would probably be easier.
Sure.
So
you make it more of an executive.
You give the cabinet the ability to pardon on a supermajority vote, and it keeps that check in the executive branch without centralizing it to one position.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So one of the challenges of our executive branch is you put a good flashlight on it. Our executive branch is the president and everyone who works for the president. That doesn't mean the president has to have the ultimate power inside of that branch. It's really interesting.
What happens to the turkey on Thanksgiving?
Eat all the turkeys. Eat all the turkeys. All right, next one. Political parties are definitively the backbone of our political system. No one can deny that. Political parties have all sorts of issues, and they're completely unregulated. Most people that I talk to are surprised when I tell them, Europeans in particular, that the political parties are extra legal entities. There are slight regulations. The FEC does some regulating of political parties, but in general, like even the position of party whip, you think it's the government position. It's not. It's a club called the Democrats and the Republicans, and they made up a job for one of their reps. It's kind of crazy that they are not codified in our legal system in any way, and problematic for a lot of people. The problem is that we can't regulate them. We can't regulate political parties' behavior effectively because they're not part of the structure of our government except by tradition and luck. Alexander Hamilton utterly failed when he said, I want to make a system that has no political parties. But he has himself to blame because he started the first one. And then we wrote a musical about the guy. Can you believe it? So, political parties have seen at least one member of Congress must follow the federal regulations for political parties. The second part, I think, gets to what someone was mentioning earlier. Political parties may replace the president if it's of their own party with a no confidence vote. This is a feature of most Western democracies. Not impeachment. Impeachment is the Senate says you're not fit for office. Right. No confidence vote is your own party saying you're not representing our party the way the party needs to be represented. So we're going to replace you without a.
Is it a popular vote of the political party or like?
No, it'd be the legislators, it'd be the Congress.
Okay.
Yeah. So if the Republicans right now said we don't like President Trump, the Republicans in either the House or the Senate or a mix of the two can vote no confidence, and that makes the president responsible to his own party members in Congress, as well as Hillary.
Yeah, but what if you have somebody who's not part of the establishment and they Trump come up?
Yeah, then he's not part of the party.
Yeah.
Go.
He's not in on it.
All right, let's get some questions going. You right there.
I know already a lot of tug of war between the executive and the legislative, who has the power to do what and who's stronger. That effectively takes, we were talking about impeachment, if you assume that's 2/3 of the Senate, you can impeach with like 3 dudes if you have a small political party. You're shifting all the power to the legislative side away from the executive insofar as who controls the executive branch.
So let's game it out. What would you do as president? Remember, political parties are supposed to stand for something. We had a weird election last time. We had someone run as a Republican who was basically a Democrat, and we had Bernie Sanders run as a Democrat who never even registered to be a member of the party. That's nuts. I'm just gonna say that's nuts. Like, you're supposed to mean something, that letter in front of your name, and if it doesn't, then what am I voting for when I vote for my local Democratic congressperson or my local Republican?
Positions, not for parties. So
yeah, that's a huge change. This is taking a lot of power away from the presidency. Absolutely it is. But it's making the president have to represent their party, even though they still have an outsized power. This is how every Western democracy basically works right now. So if you're thinking this can't work, it works in England, it works in France, it works in Germany. I don't know if it works in What's that? Yeah, they keep having elections in Australia, right? Yeah.
But Bernie wasn't confident. His party determined that, right?
What's that?
Bernie wasn't confident, right? That's what the party determined. Bernie wouldn't be good, right? So you're basically legitimizing that system, right?
Well, this would be after you're elected. So for Bernie to get a no confidence vote, he has to first be elected to be president, and then everyone has to go, you know what, no. But then what does that say about the Congress? Who says, you know what, the country just elected a person. Is the Congress really just going to say we don't like him?
Then they don't have to sell hope and change to get anybody in there. Then they swap it in with a goon.
Yeah, that's a good point. Technically possible. Yep. But probably wouldn't happen because you piss off all your own voters.
It would certainly make people pay a whole lot more attention to what their political parties are saying.
Yes. Way back against the wall. I love this. Sorry. I love all those little hello going on.
Parliamentary democracy, the head of state is chosen by the majority party.
Yeah, that is different.
People. So you have to replace this so that if there's a no confidence vote of the party, it basically removes the president and calls for a new national vote. The party, what would happen in this situation is if the party disagrees with who the public voted for as president, they can just simply replace the president with something that the party leads chose for more. So you have to accommodate this for our system.
Yeah, you'd have to write some more detailed stuff. And that obviously wouldn't be a 51-49 kind of vote either.
And
So adding on that, I think what you simply do is, rather than allowing the party to choose, you make impeachment easier. Instead of replacing the President of the United States with impeachment with the Vice President, as is in our current system, it simply calls for new elections.
Yeah, that is how most parliamentary systems work. Yeah, I think we have our 3 tiers of government that we're naturally attracted to, and they're fine. They're all good. So this would be some sort of middle ground that would allow for replacing the president of the party without having to hold an election. Because if you hold an election in those parliamentary systems, the other party can win, right? And that's not what you would want to have happen in this situation. All right. What is this? Oh, this is a good one. Oh no, it's not a good one. Yes. You all know what I'm working on.
Any
now,
questions?
Projects. All right. Does anybody here really care what state they're from anymore? Yeah. All right. If you listed 10 words about yourself, would a proud Virginian or proud Marylander be in there? Who's lived?
Well, it does become a big issue when you're talking about income tax.
Yeah. There's benefits, and who here has lived in more than 3 states? All right, so you lived in more than 3 states, and you had that feeling every time you went to a new state, how excited you were to be a. No, of course not.
Maryland still sucks.
There's a fair amount of data that.
Ohio drivers will never drive.
There's a fair amount of data that says, other than Texas, and I'm missing one, California. No, New Jersey, interesting. Everyone loves to hate you. Other than those 2 states, state ID is very, very low on the ranking of
Delaware.
Of personal. If you're a company, Delaware. Yeah, it's very, very low. So I'm just going to state that's true, and you can believe me or not, but that's what it is. The party can control the U.S. Senate right now with 8% of the vote in our country.
Cite your source, please.
So 17% of the population lives in enough states to have 51 senators. So to win those 17%, you have to get 8% of the people to vote.
You're talking about the low population density states?
Yeah, the lowest one. You start from the bottom and you roll up. By the way, when the country was founded, it wasn't much better. It was like 23%, which could bring it down to like 12%. But at that time, there were small states. I mean, the biggest cultural divide was north-south. And there were small states, low population states in the north and the south. So no one cared. They just didn't care. So does anybody believe the Senate is a less partisan, more deliberate body right now? No. So one of the things as game designers you have to understand is when you design something and it doesn't work, you have to just admit it doesn't work. And sometimes it doesn't work because it's taken a while for players to get the best strategies, the strategies that work in your rule set. And then it's your job as a game designer to change that rule set. So we have 2 versions of this amendment that are drastically different. We eliminate the U.S. Senate, and then the U.S. House grows to 1 member for 100,000 people. I'll explain both of those things real quick. Both of these things. So, the Senate and the House, what do they actually do? What do they do that's different? One gets elected slightly slower. They both write bills, they both pass bills. They're essentially the same thing with an artificial division. Yeah,
what about states like Delaware? It was like not.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's what happened. And then we're lowering the number of people that every House member represents, because if a member of Congress only represents 100,000 people, no billionaire is going to come in and say, I'm going to spend $100 million of my own fortune to be a congressperson anymore, right? And that is probably a benefit. I would rather have those people out of industry making lots of companies and doing great business stuff. All right, version 1. I'm going to let Rich take the next version of this.
So version 2, we create a 3rd house. And this house is voted on by dollars, such that $1 is 1 vote. The top 100 or some number are the people who get elected. And all of that money is fully traceable, so you know exactly who contributed each dollar to that house.
Where are you going to house these 3,000 representatives?
Oh no, we're in a different thing now. Yeah, we've moved on past that.
Yeah, this is the other version. So then the Senate.
50,000 people here right now.
So the Senate and the House.
All right, hold on.
So the Senate and the House. Now it becomes illegal to do anything regarding what as from private money to those houses, such that there's a criminal penalty. So we know exactly where all the money's going, and something has to pass the states, the people, and the people with money. So if a billionaire is like, I'm going to slap down $1 billion and become a senator in that new house, that person can do it. And you'll know exactly how much they paid, and that money goes right to the U.S. government.
This is what game theorists come up with. Exactly how game theory works.
So it's a legislative aristocracy.
Yeah, and the idea would be to pass a bill, you have to get past 2 of the 3 branches.
We'll call it the noble house.
Yeah.
The House of Lords.
We know bribery happens. Let's call it out. Let's shine sunlight on it.
Everyone knows what the House of Lords is. It's a weirdly, like, it's got a name of, like, I'm the lord of somebody in England. They don't really have much political power, but they still meet.
Yes.
Oddly, they don't have much power, but they do have an odd value add for England. Because England has this tradition of I've owned land forever, and I'm rich and important, right? They care long term more than most people do. So the weird part of House of Lords is when things get squirrely for long-term effects, they at least raise the volume for this is a problem. Yeah, so you can take all these questions you want in this one.
Yeah. Yeah, you in the blue hat.
So you were saying that, like, I love the idea of, you know, any money you spend on your election goes to as tax money. That money's being spent and, like, given to, like, advertisers. How do you pull it back and turn it into tax money?
Oh no, the dollars that you spend for that vote, that goes directly to the U.S. government.
You want $1 billion votes? You give me $1 billion.
Yeah, you write a check, U.S. Treasury, $1 billion.
Okay.
So you can buy policy, basically.
Exactly, but that happens today. The difference is, it's in one spot, we can see it.
And you don't have to watch those annoying ads over and over and over again.
Yeah. You in the middle.
Why are you repealing the 20th Amendment?
Oh, the amendment was to bring the senators to be appointed by the governors again. So we
that
have
was a placeholder. I
As a
forgot to put the number
placeholder,
in.
yes.
Sorry.
Someone didn't look stuff up, yeah.
So what amendment is it?
Yeah.
The one that allows for direct election of senators.
You've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, so this is actually an issue that I feel really strongly about, and I agree with you. We should get rid of the 17th Amendment, because what happens when the state legislatures aren't appointing senators is Congress decides to get really cute, and they're like, hey, we're going to put some money out there, and hey, states, if you want to get this money, you have to agree to do these things that we actually can't make you do constitutionally, but we can put this money out there, and then it's totally fine. Now, if the state legislatures were electing senators, you know that wouldn't be happening anymore, because right now, if I'm South Carolina and I don't want to do that, well, it's not like I get my section of that money back. The other 49 states are just going to get that money, and I'm not going to get any part of it.
Yeah, the example I'll use, if you basically to summarize what he's saying is, there's a lot of unfunded mandates that the federal government puts on people, and your belief is that the senators, if they're appointed, would stop that. The most classic one is like speed limits and highway funds.
Drinking age.
Yeah, drinking age is another good one.
Educational standards, drinking age.
Educational standards is the new one.
Trash disposal.
Should we burn through the rest of these? We have a couple more amusing
We're
ones.
done. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is clear. Money equals speech, right? That's what we decided. And votes equal speech. So citizens should be able to sell their votes on the open market like bit votes. This actually sounds like it should be legal now, except there's a law that says you can't do it. But yeah, I think bit votes make sense. Give me the money, no ads. I'll take the money. All right, we're going to run through this short out of time, sorry. Situation, people are living longer, society is changing fast, and Supreme Court justices are getting younger and more political. There's been lots of discussion about term limiting to the Supreme Court justices, giving every president two. If a justice dies or retires, they get replaced by the party of the president if the president's out of office for the remainder of the term. I don't think our founding, I hate to defend things what the founding fathers wanted, but they certainly never expected justice to be there for 45 years. The life expectancy was 45 years. All right, situation, the government can take your land through eminent domain and there's nothing you can do about it. And people hoard patents, and it is bad for motivation, and it's bad for our economy, and it's bad for our services and features that we want. So, you can do this one.
All right, so we create a national property tax price listing database so that anything that you want to be protected, you declare a price for, and it can be 10 times, 100 times, a million times, whatever the value it is. But at that value, you pay a small percent tax on that every year. So you don't want to have it too high or you're going to pay more tax. But the government or anybody else could go buy it from you from that price. So if you value your land, maybe it costs $100,000, $500,000, whatever your land is worth, but you'd say this is worth $5 million, so you pay taxes on that. The government can say, okay, I'll buy it from you for $5 million. And this makes sure that you don't have people sort of monopolizing and sort of fighting the system. Make sure people get a good value for what they declare. You can apply this to anything, trademark law, etc.
Yeah. This would be great for patents, by the way. Our patent system is a mess.
I work in pharmaceuticals and like use insulin EpiPens. They have skyrocketed in prices. If it kept up with inflation, insulin that cost $12 in 1981 should cost about $38 now. I looked it up. It doesn't. It costs $377 for 10 milliliter vial. This would be great for people to buy it out from those companies.
Right.
But
Yes.
it's not even, the companies can still make it, they can still sell it. Someone else can make that product for what it costs and charge people for what it costs to make, not what they want to get for that.
It leaves the company with two options. Either jack up the price so high that nobody can buy it and pay a massive amount of money to the US government and reduce their margins, or someone else buys it and reduces the price.
This is how game designers think.
Yes.
You come up with a drug that is great for the world and you say your patent's worth of $10 million, the government might just pay it. They just might give you the $10 million and say, great, anyone can make this.
Open it, yeah. Yeah.
All right, I was going to ask you what you thought about this, but we're out of time. So I will say it has been way too long since our Constitution has been amended, and there is a path to get this done, but I think it's going to look like the Bill of Rights, where we try to do 8 or 9 at one time,
Yeah.
7 of which you'll agree with, 2 of which you won't. But it probably does need to happen pretty soon.
And to state it again, none of us totally believe that any of this.
No matter how I sounded, I was playing a character up here. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.